Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about my week number 2 quarterback start or sit decisions for fantasy football in 2021. Inside today's video, we're going to be going over every single matchup from Thursday Night Football all the way until Monday Night Football, and I'm going to be telling you guys whether I believe you should start or sit every single quarterback in these matchups. But before we get on into the video, I would like to ask, if you are new to my channel and you do end up enjoying today's video, to please make sure that you hit that subscribe button down below. Not only is it free, I put out content every single day to help you guys win your 2021 fantasy football championship. And while you're down there, whether you are new to the channel or not, please make sure that you hit that like button down below to help boost this video up the algorithm so that more beautiful people like yourself can see today's video. I would also like to ask if you guys have a Twitter and would like to follow me on there. I always tweet the up-to-date fantasy football breaking news. My Twitter is @NotoriousFNTSY, also linked down below in the description, so please follow me on there if you would like. So without further ado, let's get into the video. We begin with a coveted Thursday night matchup between the Giants and the Washington football team in Washington. What a game this is. This is exactly what we wanted to see on Thursday night, a game between Taylor Heinicke and Daniel Jones. That's exactly what the doctor ordered for this Thursday night. So in this matchup, we're starting, as you could have probably guessed, neither of these quarterbacks. I believe that Taylor Heinicke is actually relatively good, but this is a matchup that just puts me to sleep. I don't believe that this is a game where the Giants are going to be able to put up all that many points. So I don't think the Washington football team is going to have Taylor Heinicke go out there and fight their way back into the game. Taylor Heinicke looked relatively good in last week's matchup up against the LA Chargers. Now, obviously, they did end up losing that game, but the Washington football team as a whole actually looked relatively solid with Taylor Heinicke and with Ryan Fitzpatrick in the game. Now, Ryan Fitzpatrick is going to be missing some serious time this season. Taylor Heinicke is probably a guy that some people in your league may have picked up to look to start this week in relief of Ryan Fitzpatrick, but personally, I think this matchup just isn't that great for Taylor Heinicke. The Giants defense didn't look the best up against the Denver Broncos last week, but if the offense isn't really able to score for the Giants, if this is a very low-scoring game on their end, then why would the Washington football team throw the ball? The answer is they wouldn't be throwing it that much. So I think Taylor Heinicke is a fine quarterback in certain matchups, but this matchup up against the Giants, that's a no for me. For Daniel Jones, Danny Dimes, Danny Fumbles, Danny Stumbles, the guy can do it all. I don't know why you would ever want to start Daniel Jones. This Washington football team defense looks legit. The LA Chargers found their way to the red zone a bunch of times in that matchup up against the football team, and they were getting declined a bunch. And Daniel Jones just doesn't seem like the guy who could break through a heavily fortified defense like the Washington football team. So I'm definitely going to be sitting down Danny Dimes as well as Taylor Heinicke in this matchup. Next up, we got the Sunday slate beginning with the New England Patriots at the New York Football Jets. In this game, I'm starting up Mac Jones. Now, I know a lot of people, they may be a little bit more cautious to start Mac Jones because Mac Jones didn't look ultra amazing. He didn't put up big numbers on the stat sheet in week number 1 up against the Miami Dolphins. Now, what you have to understand about that is that the Miami Dolphins defense is about 6,000 times better than the New York Football Jets. Mac Jones should have no difficulty dissecting a Jets defense that, in my opinion, just is not all that good. We saw mono man Sam Darnold look very, very good up against that Jets defense last week. I believe Mac Jones played quite well up against my Miami Dolphins. Now, again, on the stat sheet, it wasn't amazing, but it's because he was facing one of the top defenses in the National Football League. Here up against the Jets, I feel like it should be no struggle for the rookie quarterback to put up some solid numbers in his second ever game in the NFL. Zach Wilson, he looked terrible at the beginning of the game. It seemed like the Jets may not even score on the Panthers in that game. The Panthers defense just shut them down early on, but later on in the game, there was some life for the Jets, and Zach Wilson looked pretty solid. Now, I did like the Panthers defense last week. I talked about how the Panthers defense was relatively underrated, and I believe they were. They showed that off, but the Patriots defense is actually good. It is really good, and I believe Zach Wilson is going to struggle in this game to get a bunch of points on the board, which would make him a sit in fantasy football this week. Next up, we got the Denver Broncos going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars in Jacksonville. Teddy Two Gloves looked really, really good up against the New York Football Giants last week in a matchup that was relatively easily won for for the Broncos. The Jaguars, Trevor Lawrence, looked good, but he also looked terrible at the exact same time. He threw 3 touchdowns, I believe, but he matched that with 3 INTs, a Jameis Winston-esque week for Trevor Lawrence. But that was his first NFL game, but that was also up against a Houston Texans defense that I don't believe is very good, and that defense looked like the 85 fucking Bears up against the Jacksonville Jaguars. So, with that said, I'm still starting Trevor Lawrence this week up against a tough Broncos defense. But understand, he's kind of a bottom-of-the-barrel start on the week. If you have other quarterbacks, I probably like them much more if they're listed as a start in this video. When compared to Trevor Lawrence, I think he's fine. He has these great weapons around him. Laviska Shenault, Marvin Jones, as well as DJ Chark. For some reason, Urban Meyer's dumbass doesn't understand that if you hand the ball to James Robinson, that's how you move the ball. It's very easy. You just hand him the ball, you dump it off to him, and he moves the ball up the field. That's why the Jaguars, sure, they lost a million games last year, but the only reason why they were remotely close to winning any ounce of a football game was because of James Robinson. Urban Meyer seems like he is going to leave. I don't know if you guys watched that video when they asked him about the college football job that just opened, and he's like, yeah, I'm not going to go there. And he's like looking down, like staring at his feet, like, oh, I'm not going to go there. Okay, Urban. Okay. Urban Meyer seems like an idiot. I've said this multiple times in videos. People say, oh, Nick, why do you think he's an idiot? We saw it on Sunday. You lost to the Texans. That was a very easy matchup for Trevor Lawrence, and he didn't play too well, but I still think he'll be just about all right here up against the Broncos. Teddy Bridgewater did end up losing big booty Jerry Jeudy in that game, but he is going to be gone for some serious time, obviously. But the offense still has enough weapons for him to be perfectly fine here up against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Next up, we have a matchup between the Miami Dolphins and the Buffalo Bills in Miami. Now, I'm a Dolphins fan. I say this in every single video. I believe the Dolphins are going to win every single game. Now, in reality, do I think they're going to beat the Bills here? Potentially. Potentially. The spread, Vegas doesn't believe that there's going to be some type of blowout by the Buffalo Bills. The Bills didn't look that great, in my opinion, up against the Pittsburgh Steelers, and Josh Allen has a down game for fantasy football. But Josh Allen's down game in fantasy football is some quarterbacks in the league's best games for fantasy football. So I think Josh Allen, even going up here, up against a stout Miami Dolphins defense, I think Josh Allen should be just perfectly fine here in this matchup, and I would not be surprised at all, even up against the Dolphins defense that looked really good up against Mac Jones, if Josh Allen was the #1 quarterback in fantasy football. Last year, in both games of the Bills versus the Miami Dolphins, Josh Allen took the Dolphins and brought them to Pound Town. Josh Allen looked very good up against the AFC East rival in the Miami Dolphins, so I think Josh Allen should be perfectly fine in this matchup, if not one of the better quarterbacks on the week. Tua Tagovailoa will be listed as a start for me in this matchup. Now, Tua looked all right up against Mac Jones and the Buffalo Bills, obviously, or not the Buffalo Bills and the New England Patriots. Obviously, he's not technically playing against Mac Jones because Mac Jones is never out there when Tua's out there, but you get my point. The Patriots defense is very good. The Bills defense is pretty solid as well. But I believe in order for the Dolphins to win this game, this is going to be a firefight. This is going to be a back and forth affair between the Miami Dolphins and the Buffalo Bills. The Dolphins get back, sir, Will Fuller the fifth in this matchup, so they got Will Fuller. Jalen Waddle looked very good last week. Devontae Parker looked pretty good as well. So this is going to be 2 offenses fighting it out. If you believe that the Miami Dolphins have a chance to win this game, then Tua Tagovailoa is in for a very good matchup here up against the Buffalo Bills. Now, he is also one of those guys that's kind of a very risky start on the week, but I believe the upside for Tua here is the beginning of that top 12 potential quarterback finish on the year in fantasy football, the beginning of that campaign where we finally see Tua Tagovailoa kind of just actually unleashed, because last week up against the Patriots, the way to win that game is not by throwing the ball 7 zillion times. Here up against the Bills, that's probably the answer. Next up, we got the 49ers at the Philadelphia Eagles. Real quick before we get into the breakdown of this matchup, from the quarterback position, I'd like to ask, if you are new to my channel and you do end up enjoying to please make sure that you hit that subscribe button down below, as well as the like button. Again, follow me on Twitter, please, at NotoriousFNTSY. If you feel like it, you don't have to follow me on there. Obviously, you don't have to subscribe either, but if you made it this far, I'm sure you have enjoyed thus far. So, 49ers at the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, last week, I was touting Jimmy Garoppolo as a great pickup for fantasy football, and he played all right for fantasy. He looked all right, but my worry about Trey Lance coming into the game came true instantly in that game. Trey Lance comes out there, and he plays well. This offense is probably going to do that again. Would I be surprised if Trey Lance vultured a touchdown from Jimmy Garoppolo in this matchup? I would not be surprised at all. Would I be surprised if Trey Lance scored 2 touchdowns in this game and Jimmy Garoppolo maybe throws 1 or none? Not at all. So with that said, I think starting Jimmy Garoppolo, even in a matchup that I believe to be relatively solid up against the Philadelphia Eagles, is definitely risky. Now, the Philadelphia Eagles blew the back out of the Atlanta Falcons. The Eagles defense also looked super duper good in that matchup. Was it because the Eagles defense is elite? Probably not. It's more based on the fact that Matt Ryan was on his ass all game. Matt Ryan looked good early on, but then after the first couple of drives, it seemed like that team had no desire to win, no desire to move the ball. Here we got the 49ers going up against the Eagles, so obviously the 49ers should be able to score some points in this game. I think the 49ers could win this game relatively easily, but I will be sitting down Jimmy Garoppolo for a start. I will be starting up Philadelphia Eagles quarterback Jalen Hurts, who literally went off up against the Atlanta Falcons, throwing the first ever touchdown. That nice connection from him to Devontae Smith. It was beautiful to see. That was, again, an easy matchup, though. This 49ers defense is already having serious injuries to the team, though, which just about happens every single year. The 49ers and the LA Chargers are basically just cursed franchises when it comes to the defense getting hurt. We saw how good the 49ers defense is when it doesn't get hurt, taking their way to the Super Bowl, potentially beating the Kansas City Chiefs a few years ago. Obviously, they end up losing that game, but you get what I'm saying. Jalen Hurts is in for a tough matchup this week. The 49ers defense fucking folded last week terribly up against the Detroit Lions. Obviously, the Niners still won the game, but that wasn't great later on. Jalen Hurts looked very, very good. Jalen Hurts was a quarterback that I was relatively nervous about coming into this fantasy season because, hey, a lot of people are touting Jalen Hurts to potentially be a top 5 quarterback. Now, I drafted him in multiple leagues because people were nervous about Jalen Hurts. People were showing that hesitancy that I believe you needed to show when it came to Jalen Hurts. People were heavily touting this guy to potentially be that top 5 breakout, and maybe he actually will be. This test up against the 49ers will be tough, but I think with the work that Jalen Hurts gets on the ground, it makes him a very safe option this week up against the 49ers, even if the upside is potentially limited by that Niners defense. Next up, we got the LA Rams at the Indianapolis Colts. Matthew Stafford was unhinged in that game up against the Bears on Sunday Night Football. Matthew Stafford finally is freed from the Detroit Lions. He's finally now going to show that potential that he's had his whole career. Now, he's always shown off the potential, but now he gets to do it on a team with legitimate weapons. Now, I talked about this in the wide receiver video, but I will touch upon it again here in this matchup. It came out that during the game, I believe Collinsworth says that, hey, did you know that Cooper Kupp and Matthew Stafford come into the facility 2 hours early? They eat breakfast and they practice with themselves for 2 hours before practice even starts every single day. And I was like, where the fuck was this knowledge before my fantasy draft when I drafted Robert Woods ahead of him? What was that? But it's good for Matthew Stafford because he clearly has this elite connection with Cooper Kupp. It appeared in that Bears game that him and Cooper Kupp had just telepathy. That's not the correct word. Telepathy. What is that called? Fuck. I don't know the actual word or term to be using here, but what I'm talking about is that they have that mental connection with each other. It was kind of like a throwback to Big Ben and Antonio Brown, where they'd have those hand signals. It seemed like Big Ben always knew exactly what Antonio Brown was going to do in Antonio Brown's prime in Pittsburgh. It appears that Antonio Brown may still be in his prime in Tampa Bay, but you guys get what I'm saying with that. If you watch football back then, even though it's like just a couple of years ago, that's what it seems like Cooper Kupp and Matthew Stafford have. They just have this mental connection with each other, and it was chef's kiss. Beautiful. The Rams here going up against the Colts. The Colts just got eviscerated by Russell Wilson, DK Metcalf, and Tyler Lockett. So I think Matthew Stafford is going to have a field day in this game. I talked about it all offseason. Now people are going to be fucking shocked that, hey, Matthew Stafford's actually good. It's as if he's shown it off for years, but just not on real TV because no one was watching the Lions. But now all eyes are on the Rams here up against the Colts. I think Matthew Stafford tears it up. For sits, I'm going to be sitting down Carson Wentz. Now I think at some point in this season, Carson Wentz will be fully healthy and a quarterback that you can rely on week in and week out. But it was pretty clear, at least to me, that Carson Wentz wasn't 100%, and it was pretty clear even before the game that he wasn't going to be 100% because he came back very early on that timetable. This is a very tough matchup, even if Carson Wentz is 100% there. So I'm definitely sitting him down here up against the Rams. Next up, we got the, turn your headphones down a little bit, the Las Vegas Raiders at the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I gave you guys that warning, just like I did in the last video, so that, you guys could not get your ears blown out. So Derek Carr went in up against the Baltimore Ravens, and that looked like a game that was finished. Derek Carr was he was playing like his brother David Carr. Basically looked like he had no idea how to read a defense. He had no idea what he was doing. It was basically just throw the ball to Darren Waller simulator out there. It was just hilarious. It was just every ball was thrown to Darren Waller, and then Derek Carr has the balls to yell at Darren Waller, like, use both of your hands. Bro, throw the fucking ball near him, and maybe he could catch the ball. And then in the second half, at the end of the game, the fourth quarter, it seemed like everything was clicking perfectly for the Raiders. Here, this matchup is tough up against the Pittsburgh Steelers, but I do believe there are much worse options than Derek Carr this week. For the Steelers, there is a mantra that I like to talk about every single week in fantasy football. It is the theory that Big Ben is just way better at home. It's been true for the last bunch of years. At home, Big Ben is just a different beast. When he's away, he's just not as good. He wasn't that good last week. Guess what? That game was in Buffalo. Now he's at home up against the Raiders, who definitely are going to allow a lot of points to them. We saw the Ravens put up some points on them on Monday night. I think Big Ben is in for a decent start this week up against the Raiders. Next up, we got the Cincinnati Bengals at the Chicago Bears in what could be a revenge game for Andy Dalton. Those motherfuckers in Cincinnati benched Andy Dalton on his birthday a couple of years ago. I think it was in 2019. Come on, Andy Dalton's going to be pissed, but can you really rely on Andy Dalton, even with this revenge game narrative? I am a huge fan of the revenge game narrative. I talk about it all the time. I will go ahead and talk about it all year in these fantasy football videos. There's always these fun revenge games, but even with the revenge game narrative, I'm not sure that Andy Dalton doesn't get pulled during this game. I'm not sure that Justin Fields won't just vulture a touchdown or two in this game. It's very similar to Jimmy Garoppolo and Trey Lance, so I'm definitely sitting down Andy Dalton, even though this is a relatively good matchup. I'm in the pocket like Joe Burrow is a start here for the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, the Bears defense is tough on paper, but last week, they looked soft as baby shit up against the LA Rams. Now, could that be because the Rams have a very good offense? Probably. The Bengals end up winning their game up against the Minnesota Vikings with that kick from kicker McPherson in overtime, which is a sick name for a kicker. I think Joe Burrow is in for a solid matchup. Not overly excited here up against the Bears, but definitely start worthy. Next up, we got the Houston Texans at the Cleveland Browns. Now, that Jacksonville defense made Tyrod Taylor look like Patrick Mahomes, look like Brett Favre. He was looking like, maybe not Peyton Manning, but he was just looking like an elite quarterback out there. It was insane. Tyrod Taylor is like the king of the check down, and he was just unhinged in that game. I've said unhinged like 5 times during this video, but he was just heaving the pigskin all over the yard up against the Jacksonville Jaguars, but up against the Browns, up against a well-coached team, up against a defense that has Myles Garrett, that has all of these players, Jadeveon Clowney. I am scared for Tyrod Taylor in this matchup. Maybe he is a guy that you can stream on weeks where he has a good matchup because he looked really good up against the Jaguars, but here up against the Browns, he's definitely a sit for me. I'm going to be firing up Baker Mayfield in this matchup. Now, Baker, his stat line was really, really good up against the Kansas City Chiefs. He had over 300 passing yards. He had 1 INT, but he didn't have a single passing touchdown because every single time they scored, it was a 9-inch Nicholas Chubb touchdown. So I think Kareem Hunt also scored, but maybe that's a lapse of judgment there. I think Baker Mayfield is in for a solid matchup here up against the Texans. Trevor Lawrence looked good. We just got to hope that Baker can throw at least 1 or 2 touchdowns in this game. Odell Beckham Jr. is out on Sunday. Out. Seems like the Odell Beckham Jr. hype train is starting to die down now. I was never a believer in the Odell hype train. I never was, never will be. I think in Cleveland, they run the ball too much for him to be good. Kevin Stefanski sitting him down this week. This was a great matchup up against the Texans, where I would have played him because, hey, the matchup was too juicy. But this week, Mr. Baker will be without Odell Beckham Jr. Next up, we got the New Orleans Saints at the Carolina Panthers. Mono Man Sam versus the W Eater, famous Jameis Winston. Jameis Winston dissected that Packers defense like he was a high school fucking science lab teacher. Jameis Winston is looking to do the same thing up against the Panthers. Now, the Saints didn't have to throw the ball very much in that game up against the Packers because Aaron Rodgers basically just did nothing in that game. Aaron Rodgers looked like he had no idea how to play football. Aaron Rodgers finished outside of the top 32 at the quarterback position in fantasy football last week. There's only 32 starting quarterbacks. I believe he was quarterback 35 or 36, which means that there were a couple of backups who played better than Aaron Rodgers for fantasy football in that game, which is hilarious. Aaron Rodgers, we're going to talk about in a bit at the end because he's the Monday Night Football game. He's obviously going to bounce back. I think if the Saints are throwing the ball more in this matchup up against the Panthers, because I think the Panthers will be able to at least somewhat fight back into the game, then Jameis Winston could put up another big game. He threw for 5 fucking touchdowns last week, but I expect that number to go down, but I also expect the passing yards to go up significantly. I am going to be sitting down Mono Man Sam Darnold here up against the Saints. The Saints defense just destroyed Aaron Rodgers. So, while maybe that was a fluke, I don't know how you could start Sam Darnold convincingly. Now, there are going to be some scenarios where people ask in the comments, hey, should I start Mono Man Sam or should I start this other quarterback? And I'll probably tell you to start Sam, but I am worried because the Saints defense looked so good last week. Next up, we got the Minnesota Vikings at the Arizona Cardinals. Here, I'm starting Kirk Cousins. You like that of the Minnesota Vikings, but I will advise you that it is a very risky play because the Arizona Cardinals defense was all up on top of Taylor Lewan and that Tennessee Titans offensive line. Ryan Tannehill was getting Hulk slammed by Chandler Jones in that game. So could that happen again? Could the Cardinals defense just suffocate this whole offense for the Vikings? Maybe, but I don't think so. I think the Cardinals defense is going to come back down to earth at least slightly, and Kirk Cousins will be worthy of a start this week. But again, it definitely is risky based upon what we saw out of the Cardinals defense last week. But I thought the Vikings defense, or the Vikings offense, I should say, looked very good. Kyler Murray, he's a start every single week. It doesn't matter what the defense is. This dude carved up the defense of the Tennessee Titans like it was a pumpkin on Halloween. This man did a step back shot like he was Michael Jordan, dropping back just literally like off his feet, throws a fucking touchdown like it was nothing. The guy is basically what you do in Madden. Like when you create a player in Madden and you just have like 99 speed, you're running around back there behind the offensive line, just juking guys out. That's basically what Kyler Murray is in real life. Kyler Murray here is going to absolutely skull fuck. Get it? Normally I say skull fuck. Get it? Skull fuck because they're the Vikings. The Vikings defense. I'm all in favor of Mr. Kyler Murray this week. Next up, we got the Atlanta Falcons at the Buccaneers. Old man Tampa Bay Tom posting on Twitter, on Instagram, this video of him getting the hype up video for the Falcons. The clock behind him says 3:28, i.e. the 28-3 matchup up against the Falcons. When he was in New England, Tom Brady is a petty man, but it's okay. It's okay because he is going to eviscerate the Falcons. Must start quarterback this week, and Matt Ryan looked terrible against the Eagles. I don't expect him to look very good here up against that Bucs defense. Next up, we got the Les Titans at the Seattle Seahawks. Ryan Tannehill shit the bed last week. Like I said when I was talking about the Cardinals, he was just getting hit left and right in that game. But here up against Seattle, we didn't see the Indianapolis Colts quarterback Carson Wentz look all that great, but I talked about that earlier as well. I don't think he's 100% healthy here. I think the Titans have a bounce back game. Maybe they lose to Seattle, but they do look a lot better. Ryan Tannehill is definitely a safe start this week. I would not panic based upon week 1 and what happened. So Russell Wilson looked so good up against the Colts defense that, in my opinion, is better than the Titans defense. So I think Russell Wilson should be able to have a field day in this game. Maybe I was wrong about Russell Wilson. I've touched upon this in the other videos. I really believed that this was going to be a run-heavy team in Seattle. Pete Carroll kept talking about it all offseason. We need to run the ball, establish the run, blah, 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 blah. He's talking about it. And then in the season, obviously, they just absolutely torched the Indianapolis Colts with the passing attack. So I think that Chris Carson is still a fine running back for fantasy football, but Russell Wilson is definitely a must-start here up against the Titans. Next up, we got the Dallas Cowboys up against the LA Chargers. The Chargers drew a tough matchup last week up against the Washington football team. That defense is legit, and Justin Herbert didn't put up big numbers, which was to be seen. I said last week that I would be starting Justin Herbert, but I was nervous about his production. But in this matchup, it's free fucking Willy up against the Cowboys defense. The Cowboys defense got pounded out up against the Buccaneers. I think something similar happens here with Justin Herbert and Dak Prescott going into a duel. Dak Prescott looked very good up against a tough Bucs defense. Even with losing Michael Gallup, I think this offense will be perfectly fine. I expect this to be a high-scoring game, and I think Dak, as well as Justin Herbert, are guys that you need to get in your lineup this week. You drafted them pretty early on in the draft in most situations, so you want to go ahead and throw them into your lineup in what should be, like I said, a high-scoring affair. Next up, we got the Kansas City Chiefs at the Baltimore Ravens, a game that I would bet my mortgage on the fact that the Kansas City Chiefs roll the Ravens. The Ravens never play good up against the Kansas City Chiefs, but you can't sit Lamar Jackson. You just can't do it. Because even when they lose to the Chiefs, he still puts up solid fantasy numbers. He looked really good up against the Raiders. I expect him to look very good here up against the Chiefs, but the Ravens are coming off of a loss, so maybe this is the time where the tides shift and the Baltimore Ravens end up beating the Kansas City Chiefs. Patrick Mahomes looked really good up against the Browns. Started off slow, but as always, you know, you really can't take your eyes off of the Chiefs games. If you go take a shit, you might come back and the Chiefs have scored 4 touchdowns because that's just how fast the offense can play. Patrick Mahomes is an unreal start every single week. There's a reason why people drafted him as the first overall quarterback this matchup up against the Ravens, where Derek Carr looked very good this week, or last week I should say, on Monday Night Football. It should be a no-brainer to play Mahomes as well as Lamar Jackson. Final game here, the Monday Night Football matchup between the Detroit Lions and the Green Bay Packers. Like I said, Aaron Rodgers looked terrible. Seemed like Rodgers didn't want to be there. He was having flashbacks to hosting Jeopardy, and he's like, man, I wish I was there. But at the end of the day, this game up against the Lions, Rodgers normally just destroys the Lions defense. I expect this to be a huge comeback game where he could go from being one of the worst fantasy quarterbacks last week. Like I said, he was outscored by backup quarterbacks, and then this week he might be the best quarterback in fantasy football. I expect Rodgers to have a huge bounce back, as with Aaron Jones, as well as Devontae Parker. I'm going to be sitting down Jared Goff, who's on top of the world. It's going to be a complete and utter shift. Rodgers is down in the dirt. He's gloomy after that game. Goff is like, holy shit, did you guys see that? I looked really good against the 49ers. It's going to be a complete and utter reversal. 619 Rey Mysterio. Jared Goff going to go from the top to the bottom. Rodgers from the bottom to the top. I expect Rodgers to have a great game, and I think Jared Goff comes back down to earth here up against the Green Bay Packers. So thank you guys all so much for watching this video. If you did end up enjoying, please make sure that you hit that subscribe button down below, as well as that like button. I would appreciate it greatly. Make sure you follow me on Twitter as well, if you would like, at NotoriousFNTSY. I love you guys so much. I hope you do have a great rest of your guys' day, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Actually, not tomorrow. I'll see you guys in a couple of hours with another banger of a video. As always, guys, stay safe. Goodbye.